Hey fellow gamers, Chatty Sisa here. If you enjoy large open world games and titles like Skyrim or Red Dead Redemption are your thing, then Crimson Desert is definitely something you'll want to keep an eye on. The game is releasing soon and there's been a long developer interview recently where a lot of new details were shared about the world, the gameplay and what kind of game Crimson Desert actually wants to be. Since that interview jumped back and forth between topics quite a bit, I've summarized the information in clear chapters and added some of my own thoughts along the way. And from what we know so far, this game could potentially be the next best thing after The Witcher 3 that so many players have been hoping for. On the 19th of March, we'll see the release of Crimson Desert, developed and published by the South Korean video game developer and publisher Pearl Abyss. The studio is best known for creating Black Desert Online, which is an MMORPG, but Crimson Desert is something very different. There is no shared online world and no multiplayer focus. The game is designed as a standalone narrative experience meant to be played solo and over a long period of time. Everything we've heard so far points towards a large-scale, long-form game rather than something compact or short. Crimson Desert will be releasing on PC and not just on Windows, it's also coming to Mac OS, which is still fairly rare for games of this scale. In addition to that, the game will also launch on PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series X and S. The system requirements are already available on Steam for both Windows and Mac OS. I've also listed and talked about them in more detail in my previous video, 2026 games on my radar, which I'll link at the end of this one, if you want to check it out. The same goes for the pricing, which we already know from the earlier information. €70 or dollars for the standard edition and 80 for the deluxe edition. From a technical standpoint, the developers shared quite a bit as well. Crimson Desert runs on Pearl Abyss's Black Space engine, and the main technical goals they emphasized were very large draw distances, dense detailed environments, minimal loading interruptions, and stable performance across a massive open world. Development on this game has taken many years, but considering the scope, the scale of the world and how detailed these systems are shaping up to be, that long development time starts to make a lot more sense. For me, the positive bit here is the usage of the in-house engine rather than Unreal Engine 5, because the system and storage requirements are rather moderate for a game of this size and scale, which would probably not be the case with an Unreal Engine 5 game, and we all know how demanding those can be these days. When it comes to the story and the main character, there has actually been some confusion over the years, and it's understandable because early information about the game wasn't always so consistent. If you looked up Crimson Desert a couple of years ago, you might have seen the protagonist referred to as Macduff, the son of Martinus. More recent sources, however, have clarified that the main character's actual name is Cliff. Macduff appears to have been an early or shorthand reference connected to his family name rather than his given name. So in reality, we're playing as Cliff, a mercenary leader of the Greymane Free Company. At the start of the game, his group has been scattered after a devastating attack, and a large part of the story revolves around rebuilding that company while uncovering a much larger threat behind the conflict. Crimson Desert takes place on a fictional continent called Pywell, which is firmly rooted in a fantasy setting. There are hints of magic and supernatural elements, but the developers describe the world more as grounded fantasy rather than something overly mystical or heroic. The story itself is very much character-driven and shaped by political and social conflict. Different groups operate according to their own interests, and there isn't a simple good versus evil setup. From what we know so far, several factions play an important role in the world. There are the Greymanes, Cliff's own mercenary group, which is focused on survival and rebuilding after being attacked. Then there's the Black Bears, a hostile faction that serves as a major opposing force. Also mentioned so far was the House Wells, a noble family involved in political struggles and faction-related quests, and various other mercenary bands and power groups that add to the overall instability of the world. Rather than placing the player above all of this, the game treats you as part of the setting. You're not a special hero who's supposed to fix everything, but the game is rather treating the main protagonist as a character whose actions can influence outcomes, but the world doesn't revolve around you alone. The storytelling is done through a mix of world events, character interactions, and selective cutscenes, instead of constant cinematic interruptions. So for those players who prefer rather individual exploration and pacing, it will be a welcomed feature, instead of having the feeling that you're watching a game movie, occasionally interrupted by a little bit of gameplay. The overall tone was described as grounded and harsh, shaped by power struggles rather than heroic fantasy clichés. And the developers have been very careful to avoid framing the story as a traditional power fantasy. One thing that was also confirmed is that Crimson Desert will not feature a traditional romance system or branching relationship paths. The focus is clearly on the exploration, adventure, and player-driven experiences rather than some scripted romance arcs. Personally, I don't mind that at all, and I've already mentioned that previously in some related discussions. Romance options can be a nice bonus when they're done well, but for me those have never been a deciding factor when it comes to playing a game or not. What matters more is whether the world, the characters, and the story itself are engaging and well written. And based on what we know so far, Crimson Desert still looks very promising in that regard. Well within Crimson Desert is built as a fully seamless open world. There are no small, disconnected zones. Instead, the map is divided into large regions that are meant to feel like proper places rather than game levels. Based on what has been shared so far, the overall map size is said to be at least twice the size of Skyrim's and even larger than the map of Red Dead Redemption 2. Crossing the continent from one end to the other is supposed to take roughly 2 hours on horseback, which already gives you a good idea of the scale we're talking about here. What's important though, and what the developers have highlighted, is that this size isn't just empty space. The world is designed to be filled with interactive content, activities, and secrets. So exploration isn't just about covering some distance from point A to point B, but about actually discovering things along the way. Each region has its own distinct environment. The game devs confirmed multiple landscape types, including grasslands, forests, mountainous areas, snowy regions, and desert environments. So you're not locked into one dominant climate for most of the game, which is honestly a big plus. From everything we've seen so far, the areas don't look copy-pasted either. And to me, a lot of it appears to be handcrafted, which makes exploration much more rewarding. This is the kind of world where you can easily stumble across hidden locations, small details, or even Easter eggs just by wandering off the beaten path. One thing I'm personally curious about though is the weather system. I'll be honest, I'm a bit fed up with games that spend most of their time in foggy, rainy or freezing conditions. I already have that kind of weather outside of my own window, so I don't really need it in my games as well. I'm hoping there will be enough warmer and brighter regions to balance things out. But that's just my little subjective rant here. Travel between regions is described as intentional and long distance, and not overly relying on fast travel. So there should be some, but we shouldn't expect a map that's dotted with fast travel points. Technically that can be a great thing, or it can backfire, depending on how it's handled. Some players really enjoy slow travel and soaking in the world. I did that a lot in Horizon Zero Dawn, for example, where I often avoided fast travel just to enjoy the scenery. But on replays or when time is limited, fast travel becomes very important. And not everyone has the patience or the time for long journeys every single time. So this is one of those design choices that will really depend on how flexible the game ends up being. Another major aspect of the world design is how it behaves independently of the player. NPCs have daily routines, factions act on their own, and conflicts can occur without you triggering them directly. The world doesn't pause just because you're somewhere else on the map. What I like about this approach is that important events are meant to actually stick. If something happens that has a real impact, NPCs don't simply revert back to a default state once a quest is finished. We've all seen games where characters talk about events that are no longer true simply because the game reset them after a quest. And it's good to hear that Crimson Desert is trying to avoid that. On the other hand, this also raises a question. If the world keeps evolving while you're away in a different region, what happens if you miss something important? Or if you don't manage to finish a quest in time? That's not necessarily a bad thing, but it's definitely something I'm curious to see in practice. Overall, what they're aiming for is a world that feels like it has its own life, instead of one that only reacts when the player shows up. And if that works as intended, it could be one of the game's strongest features, if executed right. The combat in Crimson Desert is action-based and happens in real time. What you do, where you stand, and how you move all matter during a fight. The developers explained that combat is closely tied to physics. The enemies react differently depending on how you hit them, from which direction, and with how much force. If you knock an enemy off balance, they can fall over, slide down slopes, or get pushed into objects around them. Height and positioning also play a role, so fighting uphill or downhill can change how an encounter plays out. The fights are meant to feel solid and physical. Timing your attacks, watching enemy movement, and choosing where to engage are all important. Combat encounters are not designed to be quick and easy. Especially against stronger enemies, you're expected to pay attention and think a bit about what you're doing. You can also use parts of the environment during combat. Some objects react to force and collisions, which can affect a fight in small but useful ways. At the same time, it's clear that not everything in the world can be destroyed or manipulated, and honestly, that's fine. The goal seems to be giving you more options during combat, not turning every fight into some complete chaos. Another thing the developers talked about is that combat isn't fully scripted. Because movement, physics, and the environment all work together, as already mentioned, fights can play out a bit differently depending on how you approach them. You're not locked into one exact solution every time, and the same encounter doesn't necessarily feel identical on repeat attempts, which, in my opinion, adds great value to the replayability of the game. The exploration ties into this as well. Moving through the world isn't only about going horizontally from left to right on a map or from point A to point B. There's plenty of a vertical movement that also plays a role, like climbing, positioning yourself above enemies, or using height to your advantage. From what we've seen so far, the general feel of the, let's say, horizontal exploration reminds me of games like The Witcher 3 or Red Dead Redemption 2. The vertical side of the exploration looks to me though similar to something like The Legend of Zelda: Tears of the Kingdom, where you can explore anything from floating islands in the skies to underground caves. Overall, the combat and exploration are clearly connected systems in Crimson Desert. How you move through the world can affect how the fights start, how they develop, and how they end. If that balance works well, this will be a fun feature to exploit, especially when you're up against a stronger enemy and can use a little bit of an advantage. So that's a summary of what we've got in the almost 1 hour long interview, plus some key info on top. I still do have some more questions though, to be honest, which I'm hoping we'll get to know the answer to very soon. For example, I'm wondering about the saving system, because this could potentially be a game for months and months to come, and it'll be important to not just manually save your game whenever you please, but also, maybe, to be able to name your save as you desire or need to. I'd love that feature, to be honest. If coming back to the game after some time and re-entering such a vast world, the save name usually can give me a hint of where I am and what's next to do. And yes, I did save some games right before a fight. Forgot that. Couldn't rename my save, so when I then returned back to it and naively loaded that last save in a relaxed, good mood, it was a very unwelcome surprise to die a few times right away. But jokes aside, I'm really hoping the game will have a good saving system. Regarding the progression and difficulty scaling, from what I understood, this could work in a similar fashion like it did in The Witcher 3, for example, where you could freely roam around, and it could happen that when you strayed away from a certain path between quests, you could encounter enemies way beyond your skill level. So you had to come back later once you've gained more XP. There should be plenty of quests in Crimson Desert, so plenty of XP to gain, I guess, but that's just my personal thought, not sure about how it'll be in the game. But I'm curious, what are your impressions so far, and will you play this game? What else would you like to have within the game aside from the already mentioned features? Let me know in the comment section below, and if you like this vid, don't forget to hit the like button or subscribe to the channel, either one will be very much appreciated. Thank you very much for watching, stay tuned and game on!